regarded by many as not only one of the best races, but actually one of the best ever games released for the Sega Saturn. Does Sega Rally live up to the hype? Just why exactly was this game so important to the Saturn at this particular stage in the console's life? And just why does the track mode music in this game sound so much like the opening music to an episode of Seinfeld? Let's fire up the Celica, the Delta and the Stratos and go for a quick spin down memory lane as I discuss all this and more in my Sega Rally Sega Saturn retro review. Okay, maybe not the Seinfeld bit.
Sega Rally Championship.
Despite Daytona USA arguably being the more popular arcade game, Sega had a hell of a lot riding on their upcoming port of Sega Rally for the Sega Saturn in 1996. See, Sega made a lot of really silly decisions around this period in time, and one of those previous stupid decisions had been to rush release Daytona USA's development on the Saturn, to have it available as a launch title for the system when it first released. The result of this rushed development cycle was that it led to a severely visually compromised port of AM2's graphical powerhouse arcade title. It had a lousy choppy frame rate that ran at a rather sad 20 frames per second, a third of the Model 2 arcade machine's silky smooth 60. It had an abysmal draw distance and terrible pop-up, meaning scenery in the game just tended to appear from nowhere in front of you as you drove around the courses. And, as I once heard another YouTuber amusingly mention, it makes it look like you're about to drive off the edge of a cliff. And the final nail in the coffin for UK and European players at any rate, was a lousy, unoptimised power conversion, meaning the screen had nasty looking black borders at the top and bottom of it, because of the difference in the way PAL and NTSC displays worked. It's my opinion that Sega really effed themselves in the A with this foolish decision to rush release Daytona, instead of taking the time to get it as visually polished as possible, and it's one that I'm convinced had a severe negative impact on the early sales of the console. This was the game that should have been the crown jewel in the system's lineup of arcade ports. The thing that should have been stopping people dead in their tracks when they saw it being demoed in their local game shop and going wow. Instead it was making them stop and go ew. This was definitely compounded by the extortionate £399 price tag the Saturn was saddled with when it launched over here. There's an old adage related to gaming that goes something along the lines of graphics maketh not the game, and people will always argue that underneath its ugly exterior is a port of Daytona USA that plays very faithfully to the original. I would argue though that for a launch title on an incredibly expensive new console, and let's just remind ourselves here that according to the Bank of England's inflation calculator, £399 in 1995 would translate today to an absolutely girt-whopping £784. Your games need to demonstrate to the absolute best of their ability just what a graphical behemoth your new expensive purchase is going to be, and half-arsing the visuals on what should have been the game to demonstrate that visual power, instead of actually taking the time to get it looking as good as possible was, I think we can all agree, a pretty bad decision. Because if the launch title of your expensive new console looks shit, it's going to turn people away before they've even tried it, especially when there's a cheaper, better looking alternative out there. These negative reactions to the way Daytona USA looked were further compounded by less than flattering comparisons to the PlayStation 1's port of Namco's Ridge Racer game, which not only looked smoother and visually more polished, but also appeared to be a far closer approximation of its original arcade source material than Daytona was. Because of this, There was a lot of speculation during the launch of the two 32-bit consoles about just how capable the Sega Saturn really was compared to the PS1 when it came to actually handling 3D polygon graphics, and whether Sega's new console was in fact an underpowered, overpriced turkey compared to its significantly cheaper Sony counterpart. Well, that's a fascinating history lesson you're teaching us there, Alex. You might be thinking to yourselves at this particular time in the video, but what's this got to do with Sega Rally? Well, this is where the second wave of arcade ports for the Saturn came in, and offered Sega's beleaguered 32-bit console a chance of redemption. And probably the most eagerly anticipated of these was Sega Rally. Even before Sega Rally hit home, the second wave was already off to a good start. Virtua Fighter 2 was proving that the Saturn could do high-res, sleek, texture-matte visuals at 60 frames per second in a fighting game. Virtua Cop was knocking it out of the park as an excellent conversion of its arcade big brother. So, as the next big Sega Model 2 board arcade racer that was up for conversion, there was a lot of pressure riding on Sega Rally to prove all the naysayers wrong. To prove that the port of Daytona was just a little rough patch on the road to success, and that the Saturn actually was capable of doing decent looking and smooth 3D polygon graphics in an arcade racer. Now, I'm going to segue slightly here before talking about the port itself. You see, despite the fact that Sega Rally had so much riding on it, despite it being the game to prove that the Sega Saturn wasn't an overpriced brick, I was kind of oblivious to a lot of it. Back then, at that particular point in time, I actually wasn't really that interested in buying the game. You probably know that I really love old school arcade racing games, especially Sega ones, and that they tend to feature very prominently in the content that I produce. And in fact, Sega Rally and all its various sequels are games that have popped up quite a bit on my channel. So you might be surprised to find out that I actually wasn't a big fan of Sega Rally when it was very first released into the arcade in 1994. See, with Daytona USA it was love at first sight. I just instantly got it. Turn up at arcade with group of friends, insert £1 coin, select beginner track, race an oval for 8 laps, try to smash other players into the wall, hilarity and good times ensue. The very first time I encountered a Sega Rally cabinet though, I played a 2-player game against a friend, and the slightly different play mechanics between it and Daytona USA caught me by surprise, and I spent the entire race constantly oversteering and barely able to go straight, much to the amusement of a third friend who was spectating. Now in the video here, this is actually one of my friends who's player 2 on the right, who's having the same trouble that I was when I very first tried the game, oversteering and just constantly crashing into the wall. So because of that trouble that I'd had with the steering on my very first go, immediately after the race I just thought to myself, well, that game's a load of old cack, and then went on to think that if I never played it again I just genuinely wouldn't be that bothered. Now, I didn't intentionally then go about purposely avoiding the game. I just didn't ever really come into contact with the Sega Rally cabinet all that often. I was in 6th form back then and reliant on pocket money, that's what we call an allowance over here in the UK, US friends, that was very kindly provided to me by my dad. So at £1 a pop, arcade games weren't cheap. And anyway, I was at that age in the early to mid 90s that I had other things I wanted to spend my money on. Okay, so I was definitely a lot older than 16 in that video, but I think you get the idea. So anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that if I did see a Sega Rally cabinet, based on my bad experience playing it the first time around, I would tend to save my dosh for something else. Now, fast forward from then to sometime around 1996. I was at university now, and I'd fairly recently acquired a second-hand Sega Saturn for a bargain price. I said in my 25 years of Daytona video a few years back that I picked it up for £90, but now I think back, I think it was more like £130. That's still considerably cheaper though than the £399 launch price. The £90 was actually what I picked up a PS1 for much later in its life cycle. So having now forked out for one of these 32-bit consoles, I was very keen to try an arcade racer on it. But being a slightly later Saturn adopter, despite my love of Daytona in the arcade, I decided to bypass the original port because, as previously discussed, I just thought it looked utterly shit. And rumours were beginning to circulate around this time that Sega were going to remake it with new and improved graphics. So, although Sega Rally was already out on the Saturn by this point, based on the one and only time I'd played it in the arcade and not enjoyed it, plus taking into account the fact I was a hard-up student and had to be fairly savvy about how much I could spend in general, I decided to give Sega Rally a miss and save up and wait for the new and improved Daytona USA Championship Circuit edition to come along to satisfy my need for speed. Now, although I could only afford to buy games once in a while, lest my beer and ciggy funds got too depleted, one of the great things about now owning a CD-based games console, compared to its cartridge-based older brothers, was having access to playable demos of games. The official Sega Saturn magazine would normally ship with a cover-mounted CD, giving you access to a selection of bite-sized gaming tasters for only a couple of quid. And one particular demo disc, which I still own to this day, about 25 years after the magazine itself first came out, came with a playable demo of the forest stage from Sega Rally. And here you can see me using it on my PC to play the Sega Rally demo using a Saturn emulator that reads games directly from the PC's optical drive. Having now finally got to spend a bit of time with the game via the demo back then, I began to realise what I'd been missing out on, and the game finally began to click with me. So here we are, the actual Sega Rally demo that got me into the game in the first place, 25 years later.
Three, two, one, go! Very long, easy right. Long, easy right, baby.
Now, as previously mentioned, I couldn't just rush out to buy games whenever I felt like it, due to budgetary constraints. So it was actually a little while between me playing the demo of Sega Rally on the Saturn and eventually getting the full game, which I managed to pick up for dirt cheap second hand from the same place I got the Saturn itself from originally. Once I finally got the full game and got my teeth properly stuck into it, I finally realised why it was so popular and was held in such high regard. It didn't just look great, it played great as well. Before we get into the gameplay though, it's worth just taking a bit longer to focus on Sega Rally's visuals and just how important it was that this game looked good. As I mentioned near the start of the video, there was a ton of expectation riding on Sega Rally after Sega dropped the ball visually with Daytona. Fortunately, Sega Rally more than delivered on this front. It was a joy to behold, with a well-optimised full-screen PAL port that ran at a far faster and smoother 30 frames per second, with considerably less pop-up than Daytona USA. It really cannot be emphasised enough just how much of a difference the increase from 20 frames per second to 30 frames per second makes to the overall fluidity of the game, and the sense of speed you get from it. Visual improvements weren't the only thing that was better about Sega Rally though. It also had something else that the original port of Daytona USA sorely lacked: a two-player split-screen mode. This was another massive plus point in Sega Rally's favour, particularly in terms of the game's lastability and its replay factor, and one that the gaming mags at the time made a big deal of bigging up. The two-player mode even does a good job of keeping the frame rate smooth and trying to keep the pop-up to a minimum. So this is the thing about Sega Rally on the Saturn. It wasn't that it was just an excellent port of the arcade game, It was the proof that the Saturn actually could handle decent ports of the Model 2 board 3D polygon arcade racers that were around at the time. It was a big middle finger in the face of all those PS1 owning bellends who like to keep bringing up how much better the PS1 port of Ridge Racer was than the Saturn port of Daytona. It was catharsis packed into a 500 megabyte, or whatever size the games were, CD-ROM. It was the redemption the Saturn deserved, goddammit! Getting to now, retrospectively, see just how good Sega Rally was a bit of a revelation, even though I had been playing the equally lovely looking Daytona USA Championship Circuit Edition up to this point. Although I never really played the arcade version of Sega Rally back in the day, in subsequent years I played a fair amount of it in emulation, and unlike then, I no longer suck at it quite as much. Playing the proper arcade version now in emulation has really given me a newfound sense of appreciation of just what a superb job the Sega CS team did in converting the feel of the game from an analog wheel to a digital D-pad. The handling in the game is absolutely sublime. There is an updated Japanese version of the game called Sega Rally Plus, which actually had analog support for the Saturn 3D pad, but I've never tried it. All versions of the game supported the arcade racer wheel, but again I've never tried that either. The arcade version of the game was handled by Sega AM3, but the Saturn version was converted by Sega Japan's CS team under AM3 supervision. The Saturn port of Daytona USA Championship Circuit Edition was also handled by the CS team, a gig they received after Sega Rally based on their impressive work on it. Now if you've got any kind of familiarity with the game, I'm sure you probably know this already, but the game consists of a championship spread out over 4 stages that from left to right range from the beginner, intermediate and expert courses, the desert, forest, mountain and the bonus and very tough lakeside tracks. Your ending position on the last track determines your starting position on the next one. Come first on the mountain stage and you've completed the main championship, which then lets you have a crack at completing lakeside. As well as racing against the CPU cars, you're also racing against the timer, with any time left over from the previous stage getting added to your attempt on the next one. Sega Rally was, I believe, the first polygon racer that actually let you race on a road surface other than tarmac, with muddy and asphalt tracks also being available. The Saturn does an amazing job of replicating the stages from the Model 2 original, with each twist and turn faithfully recreated, as well as the road surfaces, with mud splashing up from the surface of the tracks as you traverse them. The arcade game came with a choice of 2 cars, the Toyota Celica and the Lancia Delta, that you could race in either a first person or a third person behind the car view. I think it wouldn't be inaccurate to say that both of these cars have developed a kind of iconic status in racing games now that I think is definitely directly attributable to Sega Rally. If modern sim driving type games have a rally section, the Celica and Delta will often pop up as bonus vehicles. They've also popped up again in all the subsequent Sega Rally sequels too, sometimes as secret or unlockable vehicles. As is standard for any Sega racing game, both automatic and manual transmission variants of all the cars exist, with the manual cars generally being faster. I believe there are some subtle differences between the Celica and the Delta, but to be honest I could never really tell much difference between them. I tend to always go for the Celica, just because I think it looks cooler. The Saturn game had an extra ace up its sleeve though compared to its arcade sibling, a bonus third vehicle, the unlockable Lancia Stratos rally car, more commonly known to kids from the 80s like me as Wheeljack from the Generation 1 Transformers cartoon. The Stratos is unlocked by coming first in the championship, and it's an absolute beast to control, especially just using digital controls. The oversteer on it is just absolutely insane. But what the Stratos lacks in handling, it makes up for in top speed, and it goes fast. Way faster than the Celica and the Delta. The music for the arcade game was composed by Takanobu Mitsuyoshi, the Daytona USA Blue Skies legend. while the Sega Saturn port soundtrack consisted of a combination of newly composed music and arrangements of the arcade originals in CD quality. This is one of those rare occasions when you get a home port that has significantly better music than its arcade counterpart. Now, in comparison to a modern driving game, 4 stages probably sounds a bit bare bones by today's standards. But back in those days, this was about the norm, and in the case of the 4 presented here, it really is a case of quality over quantity. Each time you played would result in shaving a bit more time off your total championship standing. It's a testament to the design of the desert stage that it's appeared in at least 2 of Sega Rally's sequels, and I still enjoy playing on it today. As well as the regular arcade mode, the Saturn version contains a time attack mode in which you can race across multiple laps against a player ghost. This mode allows you to customise the cars with added adjustments for handling, tyres, front and back suspension, and even the blow-off valve to give the car a different noise when moving. The Saturn version also keeps a more detailed record of lap times and statistics of that nature. There are minor differences between regions. Generally, the US version has fewer graphical details than its Japanese and European counterparts, and its replay mode has fewer camera angles. There are also a wide range of cheat codes that allow you to do things such as access the Stratos and Lakeside course without completing the championship. You can also race against the AM3 drivers in Ghost mode and access a mirror mode and also make your cars go faster. Sega Rally on the Saturn kept me racing for a long time after I first got it, and was a big hit with my university housemates too, particularly in 2-player mode. As we've already touched upon in the video, it's gone on to spawn various arcade and home-based sequels. The PC got a Windows port of the Saturn game, and the PlayStation 2 got a port of the Model 2 original, which by all accounts is totally identical to the arcade game. Criminally, this version of the game never saw release outside of Japan, as it was given away as a bonus disc with the Japan exclusive game Sega Rally 2006. I mean, what the F, Sega? Why would you not give a frickin' Sega Rally game a Western release? Anyway, in conclusion then, the point I was really trying to hit home here was just what an important landmark in the Saturn's history this game was. It, along with stuff like Virtua Fighter 2, Virtua Cop and Panzer Dragoon Zui, proved that all those early rumours about the Saturn's perceived lack of power when it came to texture map 3D polygon games just weren't true. Sega Rally truly lived up to the hype it had generated in all the UK games magazines back then, as a truly great looking and great playing arcade racer. Unfortunately though, by this point, I think the damage to the Saturn's reputation had already been done, and the PS1 had truly got its foot in the door. Now, I'm not saying that the woeful looking first port of Daytona was entirely responsible for undermining Saturn. You've got all the other stupid shit Sega fucked up around this time period to contend with too, like the mishandling of the Mega CD and the 32X, which had no doubt shaken the loyal Sega fanbase's faith in Sega, and the fact that PS1 was a whole £100 cheaper at launch. But I often find myself wondering if the Saturn had had a version of Daytona at launch that looked as polished as Sega Rally did, demoing side by side with the PS1 version of Ridge Racer in all those game stores. Would more people have flocked to the Saturn instead of the PS1? I guess we'll never know. Well, that's the end of my retro review. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you've got a Saturn and you haven't got a copy of this game, you owe it to yourself to pick it up. It really is that good. Well, now that we've got to the end of the video, there's just one thing left to say. You know what's coming, don't you?
Game over, yeah! Hello kids, it's TV's Admiral Akbar here. If you like this video, then make sure to like, share and subscribe. Why not check out some more of Mr. Thundering's Sega related videos? It's not a trap! Ho 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 ho!